You said you would talk about how one of the greatest investments a one can make in the vision is carefully selecting who is going to help support you. And we've kind of been talking about this whole idea of Joseph, not Joshua. Mm-hmm. And so I expound on that in the book because as a Joseph, which I am called to you. Mm-hmm. I am not the replacement. Mm-hmm. So meaning when you say you're done, for me, I'm done. Mm-hmm. Because I am called to you mm-hmm. as a Joseph. Yeah. Whereas Joshua, he's called to help you, but he's really called to the people. Yeah. So once you transition, that's kind of like your successor. Yes. So kind of talk about the difference when you're selecting. Yeah. Do you select a Joseph or do you select Joshua?
I think it's incredibly important that people know the difference between those two. Those are two biblical characters who both served in support roles, one for a lifetime, the other for a season. Joshua was Moses' successor. He was a successor. Joseph was one who had the ministry of support. And I think that chaos, conflict, and sometimes catastrophe happens when a guy needs a Joseph and he picks a Joshua. I think you have to know the season you're in the life of the organization, because there will be a time where every leader is going to need to find the Joshua. Mm-hmm. And the Joshua may or should function in some support role so that he can actually learn the responsibility and know what it feels like to carry the weight and bear the burden of leadership. So I get that. But Joshua is going to have a different type of ambition than Joseph. And that ambition is only going to be able to be harnessed so long. And if they aren't healthy, it's going to come out in toxic and sometimes disruptive, potentially divisive ways. Whereas a Joseph has a different type of ambition, and the ambition is not for themselves. The ambition is for Pharaoh's dreams. Mm-hmm. And that's what they feel called to. Joshua has his own. Joseph doesn't. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Right. Yeah, right. Joshua has his own dreams. Mm-hmm. Joseph's dreams about the dreams of others. Mm-hmm. He interprets the dreams of others. And I think every leader has to determine what discernment tools and what discernment process am I going to put into place to help me see who I think this person is. Because some people, I see this so frequently in religious settings, I'm going to say most people are confused. Mm-hmm. Yep. And they think they're Joshua and they should be Joseph, or they're really Joshua and they think they're Joseph, or they're Joseph and they feel like Joshua. And so what has to happen is a senior leader should not make a decision based on a number two's perception of who they are. You got to make that decision as a number one based off of your perception mm-hmm. of who they are.
We did at our 180 conference last year, we were talking about 2020 vision. Mm-hmm. And so I take some of that concepts and even put it in a book, because I talk about you have to be clear on who you are. So when you're clear on who you are as a senior leader, and then that too has to be clear as well. But how do you get the clarity? Because you're saying you need to discern what I am. What does that look like? Because first you got to understand you are a Joshua. Mm-hmm. So you mm-hmm. have to be very clear mm-hmm. that you're Joshua. Mm-hmm. I know personally who I am. I know I'm a Joseph, but what are some things that people can do to figure out who they are? In the support, like a support role, how would a person say, okay, I'm a Joshua, or I'm a Priscilla and Aquila, I'm a good Barnabas?
The first thing I want to speak to with that is that it is possible for people to experience evolutions. So there may be people who are Josephs and they think their whole life they're going to be a Joseph, and then they get to another season and they become a Joshua. Mm-hmm. And there are examples, particularly in religious settings, across the country where that is taking place, where people are in senior leadership roles who had no aspirations to do it and who didn't think they would ever become that. So I want to be clear on that. You really many people only have clarity for the season that they're in, and I get that. But I think if a person asks me, okay, what are some of the questions I can ask myself and what are some of the steps I could take to get clarity on kind of who I am? One of the first things that I would really encourage them to do is, before they try to get answers, I would encourage them to get healthy. I would say you would need to read Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, and you would need to put into practices the principles in that book. I would say you would need to go through some degree of grief recovery, because you've experienced loss in some way, and that impacts the way you interpret God's calling on your life. I would say you would need to read Emotional Intelligence. Getting healthy is a step in discerning who God's called you to be, because your needs very often scream louder than God's calling. I've seen that. People's needs for affirmation, importance, scream louder than God's calling, and they can confuse it with God's calling. So that would definitely be the first step. Then I would say, once you've done that, then you're able to be honest with yourself about, just frankly, what are your passions? Like, what are you passionate about? Are you passionate about supporting, or are you passionate about leading and initiating and mobilizing and building and gathering? I think that is also a critical step in the discernment process, being honest about your passions, and then also being honest about your giftings. Where are your gifts best served? Now, what I mean by that is, if someone, let's say for example, if someone has a management and strategic gift, what we would call in religious circles a gift of administration, right? If someone has those kind of gifts, that doesn't mean that person should be a number two. But that person has to ask themselves, based on my gifts and the way in which I feel like God's called me to display them and distribute them to the world, what is probably going to be the best role for me to carry that out? And I think if they ask those questions, that helps get them down the road and more clear on whether or not they're Joseph or Joshua.